Hola, I'm Lizzie. I'm a CASA student and also a diversity ambassador here on campus. I'd like to introduce you to Tori Martinez. She's a multi-passionate social scientist working in areas of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in rural communities of color. She is currently a community organizer for the Colorado Trust, a health equity foundation. The Colorado Trust engages those most impacted by inequities to build their collective power in order to advocate for change. Tori received her bachelor's degree here at Adams State University and her master's from Arizona State University. She is the former executive director for the Sangre de Cristo National Heritage Area here in the San Luis Valley. The Heritage Area is a nonprofit organization promoting, preserving, and protecting the profound historical, cultural, and linguistic resources of this area. She serves as an advisory council member on a place-based service learning for Community Works Institute, and she's also a published author and poet. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for that beautiful introduction, ladies. So I am a San Luis Valley native. Hispanic side of my family has been here for a few generations, so a couple hundred years, and the Native American side of my family has been here for thousands of years. In fact, some of the oldest archaeological artifacts here in the San Luis Valley date our ancestors back to about 11,000 to 13,000 years ago. So that's a long history of our people being here in this beautiful, mystical, wondrous place called the San Luis Valley that all of us are calling home. A lot of families here in the San Luis Valley are like my family, with those intertwining peoples and cultures that span over generations. And so I'd like to tell you about a couple generations past, so my grandmothers and my great-grandmothers. Now, they have passed on, so they're no longer with us. But other than my parents, my grandparents, especially my grandmothers, were the biggest influence in my life. And from my grandmothers, I learned how to sew our clothes, how to make yarn out of the wool from our sheep. I learned how to work in the potato fields and work in the pea fields, and I learned how to be compassionate with other people, how to grow our own food. But most of all, from my grandmothers, I learned the importance and the power of storytelling. And like many other families here in the Valley, I'm sure if you are from here, you've probably heard these stories before. But my grandmothers told us scary stories about La Llorona, the wailing woman who cries by the river. And as a child, when you're a little child and your grandparents are telling you these stories, it's pretty scary. I think now they've even come up in the box office with this really scary version of La Llorona. Well, that was the stories we grew up with. And now I understand that my grandmothers told us those stories because we lived by the river. And so they didn't want us going down to the river by ourselves because they didn't want us drowning. But also, because we're close to the mountains where my family has our farm, there's mountain lions that come down to the river as well. And so that was another danger and another reason for them to tell that story. And if you've ever heard a mountain lion up person live really close, they can sound like a woman wailing. And so that's another kind of piece to that story. But my grandmothers also told us mystical stories about La Chupacabra. So this interesting creature that nobody really knows, it's part this and part that, and lives up in the mountains and does a lot of scary things. But my family has land up in the mountains, and we go camping and fishing and hunting with my grandfathers and my uncles. And so, of course, our grandmothers didn't want us running off and getting lost in the mountains. And so they told us the story of La Chupacabra to keep us close to our family so we wouldn't run off. Those are just some of the stories that I'm sure other natives here in the Valley have heard before from their own families. But I think the most important thing that I learned from my grandmothers was that life isn't always beautiful. And it's a hard lesson to learn, but it's also part of the resilience of the people that are native to the San Luis Valley. Because we have to be resilient to make it through all of the different things that we've had to go through. And so, as a poet, tonight, I'd like to share a poem with you that I wrote about my grandmothers. I watch the curl of her lips and the swing of her hips as she commands the room. It's the tone of her voice, the way she moves her arms. It's the glimmer in her eyes that captivates you. Word after spoken word, she pulls you into her world, a world she creates right before your eyes, using only her words. I'm mesmerized by her every move, this modern Scheherazade. She spins a tale of old, a poem unfolds, a history remembered, her power, a treasure. The past, present, future, all within reach, and it takes her but a moment to transport you there. With the flick of her hand or the change in her tempo, she moves you from darkness to light. She stands and you quiver. She moves towards you and you sigh. She's a giant among women, an owl in flight. She's a keeper of culture, a dreamer of dreams. She's a force of nature, this storyteller. It's her long black hair flowing in the breeze. It's the scent of the fields still resting on her breasts. It is all of that and what you cannot see that my grandmothers have passed on to me. Thank you for letting me share that. As I've mentioned, I've learned so much from my grandmothers. They were such a great influence on my life. And they told me stories, beautiful stories, about our culture and our history and our traditions. You see, the Native American side of my family is Ute and Hickory Apache. And my people used to be free to roam all of this land that we call the San Luis Valley, free to hunt and fish and migrate from place to place, follow the animals, and adjust to the seasons. And they did this for thousands of years, and the proof is in all of the archaeological artifacts that you can find throughout this beautiful place. And then the Spanish conquistadores came to this place. And they came and they brought with them their steel uniforms and their weapons and their horses and their language and their religion. And they brought with them great change. And they conquered my native people. And they took the Native Americans as slaves. And Native Americans were forced to cut their hair and change the clothes and change their last names. And so for 300 years, the Spanish culture dominated in this place. For 300 years. And then Mexico revolted against Spain and won its independence. And all of a sudden, everybody in this place was Mexican. And for about a generation, they had that identity. And then the Mexican-American War happened. And all of a sudden, everybody in this place became United States citizens. That's a lot of transformation that happened over all of these years. And with that transformation is also a lot of loss. There was loss of land, loss of home, loss of language, loss of culture. Now think about that for a minute. For thousands of years, the people in this place, where we are right now, had the identity, I am Native American. And then for 300 years, same people in this place, married with the Spanish, had children, had those intertwining cultures and identities. I'm Spanish. And then the same people in the same place had the identity, I'm Mexican. And the same people in the same place had the identity, I am a US citizen. That's a lot of transition for a lot of these families to go through. A lot of loss that these families went through. I'd like to see a show of hands if you're familiar with the Holocaust. I see every hand up in this room. That's good. So, a lot of research has been done about the Holocaust survivors and their children and their grandchildren. And what that research discovered was that as this entire community together went through this historical traumatic event, that it changed the DNA and can be found, those changes, in the DNA of their children and in the DNA of their grandchildren. And it makes their grandchildren more susceptible, more vulnerable, and more impacted by PTSD, mental health conditions, and other kinds of diseases. The same holds true for the people here in the San Luis Valley. This entire community, together, has gone through that historical trauma. And it can be found in the DNA of the children, and the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren. And that's just physically speaking. There's also the social effects and the mental health effects that go along with that. And so tonight, what I've done is created an interactive activity for all of us to go through and take a journey together through the timeline of the San Luis Valley. So what you see along this back wall where all these windows are a series of posters. And on each poster are some text and some pictures. Each thing depicting a different part of a significant history. So it's either a national event that happened, or an event in our state that happened, or an event that happened locally here in the San Luis Valley. And each of those things are a cumulative effect. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. So what we're going to do is in a few moments, I'll ask you to take a journey through this timeline. And by each poster is a sheet of white paper and some sticky notes. And I'd like to introduce you to Beatrice Moreno and Eliza Chavez. They're here with me from our Hope in Alamosa team. Now, Hope is a team of young adults, all of them between the ages of 18 and 30 years old, who are helping you identify issues and challenges that young adults are dealing with right now and working to solve those together as a team. And so tonight, they also have a bunch of pens, so if you didn't bring a pen with you, you can grab a pen from one of them. And what I'd like for you to do is, as you're going through this timeline and looking at these posters, if something from a picture or something from the text jumps out at you and you find it to be meaningful, write down why on that sticky note and then put it on that white sheet of paper. Don't put your name because we want these all to be anonymous. We want people to put down their honest thoughts and feelings. If you see something or read something that pertains to a personal experience that you've had, put that on the sticky note. If it pertains to a family story that somebody once told you, put that on the sticky note. Or if it makes you curious and you have a question, put that question on the sticky note and then put that on the white sheet of paper. I'm going to put some music on, and we'll do this for about 30 minutes to give everybody a chance to go through the entire timeline. It starts in 1600 and moves up until an event that happened in 2020, so last year. Does anybody have any questions about what we're about to do? Okay, so we'll have our interpreter going along with anybody who needs translation of what's on the text. And once that's done, I'm going to turn off the music and invite you all to come back, and we're going to sit down and have a conversation about what that was like going through this timeline together. And we'll just have a talk. And then at the end of tonight, before we let everybody go, I have a really special door prize for one lucky winner. And Eliza and Beatrice are going to choose that lucky winner. All right, so have at it. Grab a pen and take a look and walk through the timeline. If you have any questions, please let us know. Tonight's event is not intended to trigger a deep emotional response, but I do understand that that can happen. So if at any moment what you see or what you read does trigger a deep emotional response, please tap myself or Eliza or B on the shoulder, and we'd be happy to step aside with you and help you process those thoughts and emotions. We don't want anybody leaving here stuck in those deep kind of thoughts and feelings. We want to be able to come back together and have a conversation.